Well, I just want to say quickly thank you to the three conveners. So thank you, Mark, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Lucina, for this excellent opportunity to be talking about some really hideous architecture. So again, a deep apology to all of my wonderful colleagues in the audience who've showed some amazing, amazing 18th century stuff. I'm going to be going a little bit in the opposite direction. So in the opening scene from the 2012 documentary, The Queen of Versailles, former computer engineer turned beauty pageant queen Jackie Siegel is certainly not coy about her love for the Palace of Versailles. And in fact, her official press portrait, depicting her lying very comfortably on the floor in front of a black velvet gilded throne, speaks profusely of her obsession with French architecture and art. After visiting the famed chateau located in the southwest of Paris, she and her husband, they're depicted on the other throne on their right, immediately decided to remodel their newest property after Louis XIV's king's house. As imposing as the White House in Washington, D.C., the Siegels' projected mansion will be much more ambitious in scale. In fact, the billionaire couple admitted that they did not set out to build the largest home in the world, but their soon mounting desires for creature comforts soon exceeded their budgetary limits. That being said, director Lauren Greenfield's film highlights how the global financial crisis of 2008 precipitated the immediate demise of Siegel's Westgate Holdings, which is a company he owns right here. With the stock market falling over 700 points, the Siegels were drastically forced to cut back on their household expenditures, making severe cuts in their formerly luxurious lifestyle, such as shopping less at Walmart. So no more of that Costco and Walmart habit. Jackie Siegel says, with the camera, bankers are like vultures. Her own mother, who also speaks in the film, says, quote, "The American dream is raising way up from where you started with, and that is what she has done," end quote. So my paper today seeks to challenge some of the more canonical interpretations of Versailles put forth by many scholars of architecture and art, and rather tries to speculate about some of the enduring afterlives of how Versailles has been transformed into a kind of cultural exemplar for the super rich and the wealthy elite of the United States. The contemporary reiterations of Versailles, as Louis XIV probably would have liked, represents both the epitome of economic and political power that was translated through the luxury of French architecture, decoration, and furnishings. But in comparison, the Siegel's American version of Versailles has been labeled, quote, "wretched excess, a monument to bad taste, a testament to waste," as a symbol of the economic surplus before the housing bubble burst in the United States. Constructed with very exotic materials, such as Brazilian mahogany, estimated to cost over $4 million, their mansion is due to be completed in May of 2017. So I'm going to explore a little bit about how the original Versailles has been transformed in this American context. And here, the repercussions of fortune and the American dream are redefined in line with these capitalist endeavors, such as Siegel's company, Westgate Resorts, and of course, the vacation architecture to be found around Orlando, Florida. So the very garish copying of Versailles, from its architectural elements to its rooms and its decorative furniture, serves a very different purpose than mere kitsch, as affirmed by the Siegels' numerous critics. Their mansion really represents for the Siegels the pinnacle of American business acumen, and accordingly, French luxury, as executed by Louis XIV, even in modern-day Florida, still transmits a very powerful aura of prestige in the 21st century, which can be attained only by the wealthy. And so thus, I think Versailles and its vehicles of taste remain an unattainable fantasy for the American middle class and a whimsical diversion for those with deep pockets and vast real estate. So even during the 17th century reign of Louis XIV, we can see that the budgetary constraints and perhaps figures of Versailles have been very difficult to calculate. But as seen from the sumptuous nature of some of the pieces you've probably viewed in the exposition, such as the Desk of the Dauphin or Folio's padded chair for the Madame de Pompadour, this really reveals his penchant for the aesthetics of the Rococo and kind of aesthetic indulgence. As a symbol of the absolutist monarchy of the Ancien Régime, Versailles has persisted as a cultural phenomenon and has dictated how Louis XIV's legacy has been translated both into popular culture and, of course, contemporary design. Its ubiquitous presence, both in film and in media, serves as a backdrop to other historical figures such as Marie Antoinette. The 2006 film of the same name, featuring actress Kirsten Dunst, for example, showcases the park of the Petit Trianon as a playground for both the aristocratic elite and the whimsical fancies of her ladies-in-waiting. A Little Chaos from 2014, if you may have seen that, starring Kate Winslet and Alan Rickman, focuses on the fictitious affair between André Le Nôtre and Sabine de Barras, who compete to design the gardens of Versailles. And of course, the Siegel's variation on the original palace makes it equally clear that cost is no object for their vanity. So this is actually a frontal view. As you can see, it's incomplete, but it's supposed to be completely finished by sometime middle of this year, and it's located in Windermere, Florida. But that being said, McMansions really represent a typically American design spectacle, rarely witnessed on the European continent. These include houses by definition measuring over 3,000 square feet in area. Embracing the more ugly aspects of architectural grammar, you can see in this image here. This was actually an image taken from the blog called McMansion Hell by a critic called Kate Wagner, who is obsessed with the McMansion. And they're featured as these monstrosities of design that represent this formulation of wealth. And as she says, there is nothing about beauty, there is nothing about symmetry, and there's nothing about history. Wagner contends that really new materials, or these cheap materials, used to construct McMansions that form these building blocks of wealth, it's not about any of that. It's about having a lot of money and having a lot of space. So she credits both of the mass production and, you can say, the ease of customization for the rise of the McMansion. I might just pause here for a second. So what I want to draw your attention to is the roof line of this hideous American house. And you can notice that there are different roof shapes, there are different pitches, and there are actually different kind of features that pop up. So for Wagner, she sees these violations of design guidelines as being the most evident feature of a McMansion versus the kind of smoother roof line of a regular mansion. So in a way, many of these kind of strange, unstructural features do not line up with the floor plan of the house. And in fact, you can also see there's a kind of penchant for oversized columns, columns that are weird shapes, columns that tend to be in places where they shouldn't be, right? And so the contemporary age of the McMansion really signals a shift from the house as being a home to a house as an asset, which is what I would like to emphasize. But you can see here from this slide also, and I want to point this out for Robert's benefit. I thought it was Louis XIV, but it's Louis XV, faux marble fireplace from 1986. But the programmatic functions for a single American family home are extreme in relationship to the rest of the American population. In fact, the average American home, this is just a quick fact for you, has increased in size, measuring almost 2,687 square feet. And over the past 40 years, the average US house has jumped over 1,000 square feet. That basically equates to doubling the size of living space per person, right? But the Siegel's anticipated mansion, you could say, will be larger than any single-family home in the world. And I'm going to show you here a quick front elevation, measuring at almost 90,000 square feet. It will be located on 10 acres of lakefront property. It will have 11 kitchens, 14 bedrooms, 32 bathrooms, a bowling alley, a roller rink, 3 indoor pools, 2 outdoor pools, a video arcade, a ballroom with 1,000-person capacity, and a 2-story movie theater, to name a few of the things that they have. So the front elevation, as you can see here, the mansion really resists classification, but much, I mean, you can't call this a particular style. It's basically, you can try, but it's impossible. Much of the architectural formwork really resurrects, at least in my mind, a lot of postmodern ideas about the actual historicity of any of these architectural elements, right? And as you can see here from the main floor plan, this was done in, I think it's either SketchUp or Revit. It's kind of hard to tell. But the mansion is divided up into several kind of areas. So you can see a primary entryway here, leading to a very, very spacious foyer that transitions into a grand hall. It's flanked on either side by a living room, library, dining room. But the most thing you can see out here is that the pool deck takes up some of the main feature of the McMansion. There are 2 kitchens available, as well as a 2-sided aquarium meant to feature live sharks. So in Australia, we have actual sharks, but the Seagulls decided, well, we actually need to have kind of live types of these dangerous creatures floating around, and they would be managed by SeaWorld. So they were thinking of the McMansion also as a kind of rentable aquarium space, which is a bit strange. The lower level, as you can see, the mansion is also divided with rooms for live-in maids. They have a whole series of maids who clean up after the family, with the majority of the floor space given over to the garage that's actually underneath the building. So the southern end, you can also see there's an indoor rink here, all sorts of kind of activities for the 8 children who live in the house, who range in age from elementary school to teenagers. And of course, undoubtedly, no McMansion would be complete without the 2 massage rooms, an exercise room, a sauna, 2 hot tubs, a gaming arcade, and a bowling alley. And you can even see there is a little bit of a reference to things like Marie Antoinette and dairy architecture and the grotto in some of the types of pools that have actually been put in to the mansion. But many of the architectural and ornamental details, even found in their current mansion, which is located on Seagull Island in Florida, can be seen also in some of these images. So on the left, you see one of the beautiful paintings from the show, and then on the right, you see the Seagulls version of that. So we can see their version of the sumptuous festooned silver vase positioned amongst the bric-a-brac in their foyer there, as well as kind of more plastered versions of this neoclassical goddess that's framing the master bathtub right here, yes, right here as well, that also echoes some of the pilasters that are in Louis XIV's Chapel of Versailles. And even Jackie Siegel's most favorite ornamental detail, and that is this very large overglass stained window from Versailles, is of course put there into the grand entryway of the new mansion that's supposed to look like the French original. And notwithstanding, last but not least, we have the famed crystal chandeliers from the Hall of Mirrors right there, that are also replicated in the casual living room of the Seagulls' current mansion. So these are small touches of extravagance framing their annual Christmas gathering. Jackie Siegel once bragged that our house is, quote, so big you can go for days without seeing some of the children. I know, this is true. This is a film from the film. And in one of the more sadly tragic moments of the documentary, she enters the bedroom here of one of her children to feed one of their many domestic pets who was living in the mansion as well. And sadly, they discover too late that the beloved iguana has been dead for a few weeks because of collective family neglect. So they forgot to feed it, and yes, he's just sadly there. So more tragedy in the McMansion. But these modified copies of canonical architecture do exist across the world, and Florida is not unique in this regard. Halsey Minor, who is a kind of dot-com millionaire, has actually replicated the Petit Trianon in San Francisco that was put onto the market for $25 million. It was known by the locals as the Koshland Mansion, named after the patrons who completed the residence in 1902 to 1905. And in fact, if you look at the kind of front elevation, you can go right here, you can see that actually Halsey Minor's copy in pink stone rendered here with the bays, the kind of almost identical columns, and the main staircase that splits into 2 pathways, both here and here, is almost slightly identical to the original one at Versailles. But I think another strand of the story, I mean, this is a quick interior photo of the Koshland Mansion, is the idea that Westgate Resorts, which was the economic engine behind much of the Seagulls' wealth, is another strand of this story. Claiming to be the largest timeshare company in the world, the resort is responsible for selling apartments and condos to middle-class Americans eager to go on long-awaited vacations of a lifetime. With world-class facilities and customer service, the resort locations range from Orlando to Vegas to Branson, Missouri to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Westgate Towers, for example, this is actually a version of one of the properties that David Siegel owns. This is in Nevada. There's another version here that's located right outside the entrance to Disney World. But its architecture, you could say, which is part motel, part apartment block, only heightens its generic quality with its template swimming pools and pruned landscaping. It's characteristic of most gated communities that you probably see around the US. A philosopher, Thomas Kluka, once observed that, quote, if works of art were judged democratically, that is, according to how many people like them, kitsch would easily defeat all of its competitors, end quote. So its status as a source of visual pleasure for a mass audience is often derided by those in the avant-garde. But you could say in this context, the Siegels really don't perceive their mansion to be excessive or in bad taste. They view the mansion as a one-stop route onto the pinnacle of economic success. Kitsch, quote, depicts instantly identifiable objects or themes, but most importantly, does not substantially enrich our associations to such objects or themes, end quote. In other words, our perceptions of the original Chateau de Versailles is not necessarily improved in any way through the comparison to these types of McMansions. But Versailles masquerading in the guise of artistic kitsch is maybe also besides the point, since really it's more about how these aesthetic objects and architecture with the original have been transforming Louis XIV's legacy in the 21st century into this aura of elite wealth and privilege. The self-congratulatory spirit of kitsch is theorized as a deception of sorts. In holding up what Hermann Broch has called, quote, a highly considerate mirror, end quote, kitsch allows contemporary man to recognize himself in the counterfeit image that it throws back at him and to confess his own lies. So their American version of Versailles relies less on the resemblance to the original and more about its role in enabling the Siegel's appetite for material decadence. But as Jackie Siegel shares in the film, she says, quote, I'm in this fantasy world until reality hits, end quote. So she doesn't care. They were spending money like water. And you can see this is a digital rendering, again, of the yet-to-be-built Versailles version of the mansion with its kind of coffered ceilings, this very tricked-out Corinthian column. And it's a stark reality in comparison to what their maids experience. So this is a still from the film as well. This is one of their Filipino maids who has said, quote, you know, this is my palace, end quote. It's good to have this. She has taken over one of the discarded playhouses that was given to one of the Siegel's children and has made it into her own private bedroom. So she keeps her personal belongings there, she takes naps in there, spends downtime there, and she sends most of her paycheck back to the Philippines where she supports her children, her brothers, and her sisters. But are these hyperbolic designs so disruptive that they really ruin the appreciation for the original? And we can say that these types of reverberations, as Alison has well put it, oscillate wildly from continent to continent. And even China's nouveau riche, for example, has taken Versailles as a model of emulation. This is, you can see a pharmaceutical factory in Harbin, in the north part of China, and it's essentially a pharmaceutical factory that has copied the interiors of Versailles, but with a golden tone. So you have all these amazing golden ceilings, golden hallways, and of course the golden boardroom, which is laden with marble, gold leaf, and crystal. But most of these spaces have sparked immediate outrage by the local citizens in China. Is it the opulence and the capitalist funding behind such spaces that causes so much outrage and so much envy that these people cannot afford certain lifestyles of this caliber? Architecture doubling as a mode of economic critique is nothing new. Such designs have always served to justify the sphere of power and of influence and have mirrored the personalities of their global jet-setting patrons. The competing flaws and the virtues of the American dream are not limited to Americans, the French, or the Chinese, for that matter. Bigger does seem to signal a better life, a better lifestyle, and thus a superior sense of economic well-being translated into aesthetic self-indulgence. But in light of these McMansion dreams and these more affluent visions of Versailles constructed in America, recall these exorbitant flights of fancy that only serve to reaffirm that all of these types of gold gilding and the Hall of Mirrors are not intended for the average citizen. American consumerism, defined by Costco and by Walmart, finds a parallel in the fact that the original Versailles contained over 2,300 rooms and measured over 63,000 square meters. If the 99% of America can only afford a modest bungalow and micro apartments, only the 1% then have the time and the resources to consume Versailles as a symbol of financial success. Wealth is really never an end unto itself, but perhaps living well, as Louis XIV would have presumed, remains the best form of economic propaganda. The American dream of rising above poverty and the modest means is equally incorporated into these narratives around the McMansion. Accumulation, consumerism, and materialism not only define the 1%, but the rest of the American public, who secretly wish that they too had their own personal Versailles. Thank you.